Hello.
Welcome to Hugo Girl. My name is Haley.
I'm Lori.
I'm Amy.
And you're tuned into an episode about Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. Robert Heinlein is one of the big three in science fiction, along with Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. So he won at least 2 or 3 Hugos. I'm going to myth that, but he's a big dude in the world of science fiction in the 60s. This was published in 2 parts in 1959 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction as Starship Soldier originally. It went on to win the Hugo for Best Novel in 1960. The plot. Let's get down to the plot. All right. Some of you may have watched the movie from the 90s starring Doogie Howser and Denise Richards and Rue McClanahan.
Starring Rue McClanahan.
Yes, I'm going to focus on her even though she's only in it for 2 minutes.
I was very excited to see her.
So I love Casper Van Dien, but I feel like saying his name, no one knows who that is besides
I have
this
no
movie.
idea who that is. Who is that?
Oh, fair.
I think he's a very handsome man, but no one knows who he is.
Who is he?
Isn't Felicity in it too?
No.
Oh, I thought Felicity was in it.
No, there's another pretty curly-haired lady, but it's not her.
Who's Casper?
Casper Van Dien is Johnny Rico.
Oh, I never heard of him before.
Yeah, he wasn't in anything else or anything before. Like his career fizzled completely. So,
Huh.
But yeah, so the movie very different, but takes its inspiration from the book. Alrighty, so for the plot, set 700-ish years in the future, Earth and its colonies are ruled by the Terran Federation. The primary distinguishing characteristic of which, as far as I can tell, is that only citizens can vote. To win your franchise, you just have to serve in the army. And if you choose not to serve, you retain the rights of free speech and assembly, but cannot vote or hold public office. The book follows our protagonist, Johnny Rico, as he enlists in the mobile infantry, which I imagine to be akin to the Space Marine paratroopers. Over half the novel is his training at Camp Curry. Earth then goes to war with an alien race from Klendathu across the galaxy. These are arachnid species referred to as bugs, and that's mainly what you need to know about the plot. It's not told linearly, and it spends much of its time in flashbacks to Johnny's training and initial deployments, as well as to his history and moral philosophy class he had in high school. He becomes an officer eventually. He gets lashed once. There are lots of battles, though there's not a lot of action. His dad, who was originally opposed to his military service in the beginning of the book, eventually becomes his platoon sergeant in a really weird soap opera scene we'll talk about later. And that's mostly it. So, yeah. Let's get on to goodies from Goodreads. User Tatiana says, basically, it's one long military lecture wrapped in paper-thin science fiction plot. I was surprised by how little action there was and how much pontificating on military strategy and training there was.
Mm-hmm.
More than half of it reads like a textbook. I don't mention this quote as necessarily a bad thing, as I do enjoy this book, but it is... You have to really like Army to like this book.
It's sort of a thought exercise about like a military-run democracy. I don't know. It's such an odd book, but it's it's less plot and more just sort of thinking.
It almost feels like a diary to me.
Yeah, it does. But it's
is
so little, like Johnny himself matters so little in the grand scheme of the thing that it's like, I really feel like he was almost an afterthought. He was sort of a vehicle to deliver all of this information to us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something that I mentioned later. Like, one infantryman doesn't really mean a lot. So, food for thought.
I think my favorite review was one that isn't even about the book. It's on Amazon it's from Lucille Johnson, and she basically is just reviewing the audiobook, and she just says the narrator's terrible, slimy, over emphatic, and downright sickening nerd voice ruined the experience of the read for me. Once you hear him speak, you can't get it out. Don't buy the Audible version.
I am gonna go listen to the Audible preview as soon as I can.
It's so emphatic.
Oh, how funny.
I think probably the most spot-on review is from a Goodreads user named Lucas, who said, "You will not see action in this book that is advertised to be about killing gigantic outer space bugs. Instead, you will be treated to the doldrums of a soldier that isn't busy killing things. Guard duty, sleeping, maintaining weapons and space armor, dinner and its various protocols. Even his time off gets more detail than all the fighting Rico participates in combined." So yeah,
Haley, that's like what you always say about like when we read The Terror and you're like being on a ship was like you just had to come up with things to do to occupy your time, like scrub the deck again because there isn't anything else to do.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I
I
really
think
get the blow by blow of that.
That's how you keep, 200 21-year-old dudes that are like in the best shape of their life from getting into fights, I imagine. It's like, you got to have a 1-hour dinner protocol. And then I think probably the best review is from Kelly, who loves the movie and says, I need people to realize that sometimes it's okay to not read the book. It is funny how different it is from the movie, which, the movie's flashy and there's bug juice and it's lots of boobs and it's just
So
it's
many
more
boobs.
interesting. So many boobs.
The movie's just so cheesy. I love it.
Yeah. But yeah, so those are my goodies from Goodreads. To kick us off into the general discussion, we're going to start out hard. I'm not going to hold any punches. Is this novel fascist? Go.
After I read the Wikipedia article about this book, I would say yes.
Huh.
When I was reading it, I was like, I don't know if Heinlein is signifying on this stuff or if he's like, spare the rod and spoil the puppy. And that like 10-page lecture on how you should spank a puppy and a child or society will collapse was serious or not. And then I read Wikipedia and Wikipedia was like, yes, he meant all of that.
Oh, yeah. He was like Mr. Navy, I think, and which is funny because he spends a lot of time making fun of the Navy in this book. But
they call it the wet Navy. Is that a thing? Is that just a thing from this book?
I think so, because Space Navy wouldn't be wet.
Right.
So I really like Army books. Maybe y'all know about this about me. So I ate almost everything procedurally wise up about this book. But in terms of the fascism stuff, I can't really tell when he's being serious or not, when it's supposed to be satire. And also, I don't think we know enough about the government. We just know this one man's thoughts from his class or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. I was like happy to see that it seems to be like I don't know about happy. I don't know if that's the right word. I was pleasantly surprised that it seemed to be like a pretty egalitarian society in terms of race and sex. That was surprising to me. And then, of course, the movie is very whitewashed. But the book seemed like there didn't really seem to be much sexism other than in Johnny's head when he's thinking about how Carmen manages to be so skilled in spite of how ornamental she is. So that was a fun surprise for a book from this era.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to, when you read a book, are characters always mouthpieces for the author? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, Heinlein, he likes to pontificate in his books. Like, I feel like if you read Stranger in a Strange Land is a good example too. Like he tends to like wax poetic about the state, the world, and his philosophical view of the world in his books. And so I think in this particular case, Heinlein definitely comes through. It's not necessarily his characters. It's actually Heinlein.
Yeah.
That's what Wikipedia told me.
Yeah.
This is my first Heinlein. And I was like, is he serious right now? Or is he like making fun of people who would lecture for 10 pages about spanking puppies?
No way, man. He loves it.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Spare the rod and spoil the puppy. Or spoil the carpet, I suppose.
Yeah, well, and so when it comes down to this thing about having to be in the service to become a citizen, I don't hate it because you have to serve in the service or whatever, but you don't have to join like the infantry. You can join as a truck driver, a cook, a doctor. You could be a lawyer. You could be whatever you wanted to be. So like that makes it a little bit less fascist for me, I think.
And I did like the generally the idea that people who are given the right to vote are the people who have demonstrated that they'll put others before themselves is an interesting one to me. Like I don't know which way I come down on it necessarily, but it's an interesting thought. Like people who haven't demonstrated that don't get to vote. It's not like a judgment on them. It's just, this is the thing you have to demonstrate in order to get to vote.
Well, yeah. And like, if you think about our current society, most people don't vote. And the way that we have it set up now with our racist ass system, like we have so many restrictions on voting. Like,
yeah,
like ours is more fascist now, I would argue. I don't know. But
I mean, I think it's true, but it's like, we say a lot of words about having universal voting, but obviously that's not true. Like we have a lot of limits on who can vote. And the limits, as they point out in this book, are somewhat arbitrary. It's just like age. It used to be property. It used to, it's like all these limits that have nothing to do with your actual understanding of the system, your actual understanding of what you're voting for. It's sort of like, it's just the limits are divorced from anything practical. And so at least this is a practical association with the right to vote, right? It's like, here's this thing you can do to demonstrate you can do this thing. I don't know.
It means to be, but I mean, I think in practice,
I don't know
we
that
can
it's
see like you have to serve a government that you might not agree with. Like,
right.
If I had to serve the Trump administration in order to vote, like, is that an expression of my ability to put my fellow person before myself? I don't think so.
But in this world, we never would have had a Trump administration because you had to serve in the military to hold office.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So it's like, so
I would love to see the vote numbers for citizens in this world. Like, is it 100% voting? I hope so. Because a lot of them have like missing limbs and stuff like that. So,
that's an interesting question.
They also said this thing in there about how revolution is impossible because in this society, because people who have any aggressive tendencies are weeded out into the military or something like that. And it's like, I don't know if that's true. There are definitely going to be people who don't like the system, who have aggressive tendencies, who will be revolutionary. I think anytime and ever you're going to have that.
Well, yeah. And there's plenty of people in the army that aren't infantry.
Yeah, like I think that's a soft spot in his philosophy here. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't like the system.
But it supports his point, so he made it.
Right.
All right.
I'm just going to glide right past that.
My next question that I kind of already answered is, why don't we learn more about the war? Like, is it just because this is a first-person narrator, or does it say a greater point about, the grunts don't ever know why they're fighting or what the strategy is?
I think that's what it's going for, because at one point, Johnny says the MI just fights. We don't need to know why. We just fight.
No, that's true. And like, that's that classic quote, like, ours not to reason why, ours to do or die.
Also, it's interesting that he created an enemy that like I felt like he created an enemy that anybody reading this book would have sort of a knee-jerk instinct to dislike, right? Like it wasn't controversial that he made the bug the enemy. Like he just created this enemy that he could then use as a backdrop to make all of his points, right? So it doesn't really matter what the war is about or what, it's a very basic system. It's like, okay, there are planets, two species want these planets, therefore they will fight. The species we are fighting looks nothing like us and we don't understand them, therefore it's okay for them to be the enemy. Now let me tell you all about my military thoughts.
Yeah, so this book, he actually wrote it in response to when the U.S. had suspended the nuclear trials. And he was like, no. Nuclear bombs are where it's at. Let me write you the space book about why we need nuclear weapons. And that
interesting.
Is the origin of this book. Yep.
I did not know that.
Yep.
And he definitely wrote it after, because he wrote it after World War II, obviously. So
he wrote it in 1959. Yep.
Yeah, so he knew the devastation they could.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was like right before that, Bay of Pigs, scary stuff.
On the subject of bugs, did Orson Scott Card just steal this book?
I maybe.
I couldn't stop thinking about it every time they were like bugs and tunnels, and then Kevin was like, "Oh, the Bunner Tuggles." So that was that was a fun callback to episode 1 of this podcast. I think, yeah. Oh, in the Bunner Tuggles. But yeah, it was very much in like the hive mind and everything, which of course, like that's sort of how humans think of bugs in many ways anyway. But I don't know. It just seemed like Orson Scott Card was like, a little from column A, a little from column B, a lot from column C, add in some weird, uncomfortable sexuality that he doesn't want to acknowledge, and wrap it in a cover and call it Ender's Game.
These men all love each other so much.
Yeah, I think it's because not a lot of people love bugs. And I think, big bugs are scary and it's very easy to otherize and dehumanize them, literally.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like how, I don't know where I read this and this may be false, but in Star Wars, they, there's lots of shooting of stormtroopers, but you never see blood or anything. But like, those are men in those suits. But then in the prequels, all of the bad guys are those robot guys. And my theory on that is because it's less sad for kids to watch robots getting destroyed than, potential men. So maybe it's the same thing, like, killing bugs, not a big deal.
Oh, yeah, because, they, like, a bug comes in our house and most of us automatically just stomp it.
Yeah.
So we see a giant bug and we're like, oh, no, we need a bomb to stomp it.
Yeah. Well, and unlike Ender's Game, like, there's no niceness about the bugs. They're just like, nope, we hate these bugs. So
why does it have to be spiders? Spiders are good.
I know in the movie they don't look like spiders. They just look like these monstrous, muscly arachnid. Not really spiders, not really bugs.
They
like,
look really different from each other too. There's a lot of like bug diversity.
Yeah, there's like the warrior ones, and then there's like the marauders or whatever. So
I mean, I think people are just in general. People are scared of. I mean, we have a whole movie about it, arachnophobia.
That's a good
We're
movie.
just scared of and grossed out by spiders, so it's a easy thing to build. Like Haley said, it's an easy thing to position as an enemy.
that's
It
true.
it should always be cockroaches.
Yeah.
Speaking of taking plot points from books, when I was reading, there's this part in the book where Johnny is getting sent to be a fake officer on a ship so he can finish up officer school. And there's this scene where the general guy is giving out pips where they're going to take them and they're going to go on their ships. And there's these 3 guys and they're all being given pips. And the general is like picking boxes of pips and giving them to the guys to put on and go. And it rang so much to me like I was reading the scene in Harry Potter where he goes to Ollivander's to get his wand.
Oh, yeah.
And like they're going through all these wands and he's like, well, maybe this one, but no, not this one. How would you feel about and try this one out? And it's very much just the scene from Ollivander's when he's giving out those pips.
But very dark because like everyone that wore these died. I hope you fixed the luck.
Yep.
What do y'all think about all the training montage scenes? So I love training montages. I will watch boot camp videos on YouTube at least once a month. So I'm fascinated by like institutional organization and training and the ritual and routine. Do y'all have any interest in that stuff?
I mean, part of me just wants to go to one so that I can get whipped into shape by somebody who is scary. That's my main reaction.
I felt like, as I've said with a lot of books that I think are from this same era, I felt like I would have enjoyed reading this if I got a science fiction magazine once a month and it was a few pages of this and I'd be like, oh, what's going on with Johnny? Or what can I learn about the Space Navy today? And I could just read it for a few minutes. But for me as a novel, I like to think of a novel as something that I want to keep reading because I want to know what happens next. And so reading all of these training montages, I was just sort of like, it's not that it's not interesting, but it's not compelling. So I thought that they were interesting, and I actually like a lot of the writing. I think there are a lot of very quippy lines that are funny, and I laughed out loud a couple times reading it. But for me, I did not like reading so many training montages back to back to back, and I struggled with it.
So many training montages. Yeah. I agree. Like that's exactly what you said. Interesting, but not compelling. That's why I've never in my life, ever, my entire goddamn life, finished a nonfiction book because there's no sense of urgency. So,
I think well-written ones have that personally, but maybe that's just a personal taste thing.
I finished 2 nonfiction books. One of them was In the Heart of the Sea about the sinking of the whale ship Essex. And it is so good.
It's very riveting.
I did finish that one, but Moby Dick exception.
Everybody go read that. It's by Nathaniel Philbrick. It's so good. And the other one that I have finished is A Down the Rabbit Hole, Holly Madison's story of living at the Playboy Mansion as Hugh Hefner's number 1 girlfriend. Also riveting.
I have finished a lot of nonfiction books in my time. I like nonfiction. I like learning stuff.
Yeah, I think I do too. I just don't ever finish them. Like I'll read 400 pages of one and learn plenty. It's just
there have definitely been a lot that I have not finished too. I don't mean to sound like I'm like some sort of nonfiction reading machine, but I think the basic training stuff and the training montages, to me, I do think it is interesting to think about what goes into like figuring out with military precision exactly what you need to do to turn men into tools, right? Like you take these people, you put them at a place, you isolate them, you break them down, you build them back up, you send them out, that now they will go fight and die for each other. Like that is a very interesting idea to me. That like, because if someone put me in a war right now, not having done any of that, I certainly wouldn't be a very good MI.
Yeah. Well,
like
it's funny because I was raised with my dad's stories of being an Army Ranger, which apart from a regular Army guy, Army Rangers are, you completely volunteer, you can quit at any time. And so my dad would tell us these stories of like, just wanting something really bad and how hard you had to work. And he said that at one point, and I'll never forget the story, like they taped toothpicks to their fingers and then made them go out and rake leaves with it just to like humiliate them and see how badly they wanted to be Army Rangers. And my dad did it. Like,
wow.
I can't imagine liking anything that much.
And your dad is not a great example of a person who puts the citizenry before himself.
True.
But he would be one of the few voters in this society.
That's a really interesting point, though. So it's like he waxes so poetic about how all of these people understand that they are putting their bodies between the enemy and home, that the most important reason to fight is the voice of a female, that, like there's all these like lofty reasons to fight, but he never really talks about or even obliquely hints at the idea that you're also protecting people you don't agree with, right? And like, in this world, it's like everybody putters along as part of this, as a willing participant in this society, and there's no discord. But then obviously there's crime, because they talk about the guy who goes and kidnaps that girl, and they talk about crime being a thing that exists. So there's obviously elements of this society that aren't savory, but there's no I don't know. I'm trying to think of some.
I just don't think we know enough about the society.
Yeah, I mean,
we just don't know.
and we just don't see it. We see such a small sliver, and it's all through Johnny's eyes,
like a 19-year-old.
Yeah,
and it's a very black and white view of the world, right? This guy has his view of the world is not nuanced, right? He's constantly confused, constantly surprised by things that come up, which I guess he's 18, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
but
he's
like,
a child, basically.
Yeah, he's a baby, so it makes sense. But the view of this world is very myopic, I guess.
I have a question on the subject of what does it take to take these young people and turn them into tools. Mm-hmm. Do you think, so there's the scene where Johnny sees one of his classmates get flogged 10 times and he's so sickened by it and he's like, yep, I'm done, I'm going home. And he decides as soon as at his first opportunity, which gets thwarted a couple times for whatever reason, his first opportunity is going to let them know he's going home, and he is done. And then, just as if by magic, he gets this very inspiring letter from the teacher who was such a hard ass, being like, I'm so proud of you. I always knew this was in your future. You fulfilled all my hopes for you. And he reads that letter and he's euphoric and he's like, never mind, I'm going to stay. And when I read that, I thought that letter was probably a plant and that they probably have something like that for all of them, so that if someone who they think is likely to be successful or shows promise starts to waver, that they can whip that out to get them over whatever like emotional hump they're in. I really think it was a psychological tool. What do you guys think? Do you think it was a real letter?
Oh, I had never thought about that. But that's smart.
I just took it totally at face value as being a real letter.
Like maybe, but I was just like, it's too convenient that on the very day you resolved to go home after you saw something truly gruesome and horrific, and then you get this letter from this guy who was never nice to you.
Yeah, gave no indication that he liked him.
Yeah, you get thrown this affection that you didn't expect, that there's no basis for or precedent for. You're disconnected from your dad. All you want to do is go home because you've seen this horrible thing happen. And then, I mean, it's like sort of a classic abuse tactic, right? Like you're like, I am done. I am over this. I am not participating in this anymore. And then someone hands you a little envelope full of love and you're like, oh, but maybe I'll stay.
Well, that's another example of why the movie is such a better version of the story, because like that's when he's about to walk down Washout Lane and he's like, oh no, your hometown was just destroyed.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to give this my all because I have nothing. That's brutal in a sense. Like his family has now literally become the mobile infantry. So, but yeah, that theory is really smart, Lori. I like it.
I guess the only thing that I would think maybe goes the other way is that, but this could have been part of that too. Now I have this big conspiracy theory, Lori, thanks. But like when, because that Sergeant Zim at Camp Curry, like after he gets that letter, Sergeant Zim's like, he was my friend or whatever. And that's the only thing that makes me think the letter was maybe real now. But now I think maybe that could be part of it.
Oh, I thought that was part of it. I thought that could all be part of it too. It's all connected, which would be like a lot of.
It goes all the way to the top.
It's an elaborate investment in an individual, but I mean, they could have a version of that letter for every guy there.
Yeah.
So then, did the general also make up that Dubois had written in to ask that Johnny get his pips?
I thought that too.
Interesting.
I mean, it was convenient that he would only communicate with Johnny through superiors at really crucial moments in the plot. That's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. I guess if Johnny wrote him back, he would never know if the letter actually got mailed.
It was always at a turning point.
Yeah. And never like, hey, Johnny, what's up? Hope
Yeah,
things are well.
he never just got a letter like, here's how things are going back home. Well, who's your bunkmate? Who's your supervisor? Oh, by the way, military hierarchy is something that I cannot hold in my mind. Doesn't matter how many times I look it up. And so when he runs into his dad at the end and his dad's a colonel, and I was like, Colonel, Sergeant, because his dad's not been in as long as he has, but his dad's older. And I was like, who's in charge in this situation?
I wish they would give them titles like paragraphs and an like it's an outline, like I, then a lowercase one A, and then a little ruminant I. And that's how it would work much better in my brain if they would just do that. I also can't keep track like platoon, battalion, company, doo-ba-doo. No idea.
It's like shilling and pence. I don't know what that means.
Oh yeah, really.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter how many British novels I read. I'm still like a hey penny. That's like $20.
Yeah. Well, and it's even harder when it's like a shilling in 1880. I'm like, I can't even do this in modern times, let alone like the inflation. No.
Yep.
One thing about ranks that I found was really interesting, and I don't know if this is true in America, but like in the book, so a captain of a ship is called a captain, but also there's an army rank called captain, which is above a lieutenant and below a major. So to avoid having two captains on the same ship, even though they're different ranks, they would call the army captain major as a way to like not confuse the two, which I thought was even more confusing.
That was fascinating. And that's when I learned what the term Commodore meant. I never knew what that meant, but I guess it's a term for a higher ranking Navy person or who's a captain on a different ship, but who's visiting the Navy ship and isn't the captain of that ship.
Well, so it's also a rank too, but there's just different ways to do it. So yeah, like military stuff is all about just like pomp and circumstance, really. It's fascinating.
Which I am a fan. I like a pomp and a circumstance.
Alrighty. Any other general discussion points? I don't have a ton, just because there's not a ton to talk about.
I would like to know, there's so much discussion towards the end of the book about the low radiation on this planet that humans have populated and how people are not going to evolve as quickly because they don't have enough radiation. Is that real?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Do we evolve because we're getting irradiated?
Hold on, wait.
It's presumed that it's a good thing. It's good for us to evolve due to radiation. But then like in other stuff, in like Canticle for Leibowitz, radiation gives us like weird second heads. So I really didn't know.
I guess so. That supposition is that every single human mutation comes from radiation, which I don't know if that's true.
Well, he mentions natural selection, but basically it sounds like the premise is that radiation is the primary driving factor in evolution.
Yeah, I don't think he was a scientist.
And it also doesn't make sense.
He was an engineer.
Well, was he a biologist though?
Does that get him anywhere?
Wouldn't it be somewhat random if it's driven primarily by evolution instead of like natural selection and response to other changes in your environment? Like,
well, I guess, but on top of all that, though, it's like one day your cells decide to do a weird mutation thing, and then all of a sudden you've got 6 fingers versus 5. But like, it's what's causing that mutation. Like, is it always from radiation? Is the question, and I don't know if that's true.
If we have science friends listening, please feel free to explain and even mansplain this to us. I consent.
We need a evolutionary biologist to tell us what the hell happens.
Something I could just Google, but I would.
Well, I just Googled, do we evolve because we're getting radiation? and there are a lot of interesting hits, one of which is a NBCnews.com story that says, will Mars colonists evolve into this new kind of human? And it talks about the effect of radiation on evolution. So I wonder if it's like a little A, little B, right? There's a little bit of radiation, so that helps our cells mutate, but then there's also reactions to our environment and to each other and, that sort of thing.
We probably just figured it out. We don't need you to tweet us.
We're the science friends were the friends we made along the way.
This is a science podcast now. I have another comment about the mobile infantry. So
when
I was reading this, they seem like machines, right? Like all of them are like, if Tony Stark were actually disciplined, they seem really awesome to me. But then also like in some instances, it seems like they're just looked down on and thought of as like grunts, and especially in the movie they're just like a bunch of drunk cowboys. But like to me they seem like super soldiers. They seem pretty fucking cool. So I was surprised at this sort of dichotomy between like they are really finely tuned machines. They jump out of spaceships. I mean, they seem really cool to me, but then also they're like, oh, the mobile infantry is where you go if you're like not quick enough to be a pilot, you're not smart enough to be in R&D like their friend Carl. So what do you think about that? Is mobile infantry cool, or is mobile infantry cannon fodder for the bugs? I couldn't figure it out.
Probably depends on if you ask a mobile infantry or if you ask someone else, right? It's like their view of themselves versus other people's view of them. Like people don't know what they do really because they aren't one, so they will probably never have the same vision of them that they do of themselves, right?
I mean, if I was a pilot and somebody showed up looking like Iron Man and was like leaping over buildings, I would be like, oh, that's cool.
But they're not doing that. Their suit is doing that, right? So it's like you could put anybody in one of those suits and they could do that. And,
I mean, I think a whole generation of Marvel fans would disagree with that.
Well, I'm just saying that's what an outside person would think. If they've decided to look down on the military infantry or the mobile infantry, then they could say that. I don't know. I think every it seems like every military branch thinks most highly of themselves. That seems to be the running.
That seems true.
I don't know if this is true, but my dad told me this because he was an Army guy.
Let's just assume it's true.
Yeah. That the Marine Corps has the lowest ASVAB requirement test rate versus the Air Force is the highest, obviously, because they, are most of the pilots. Then it's like Navy, Army, and then Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is lower. I mean,
what is that test? I don't know what that is.
Oh, the ASVAB? That's something that people
I'm a military baby. I know nothing.
Okay.
So I know that because I grew up in Savannah and there's a military base there.
Yeah, so
a couple of them.
I was raised by an Army guy, and the ASVAB is an aptitude test that you usually take in high school. I took it to get out of pre-calculus. And it's like a variety of sections. It's not like the SAT. It's not that hard. It's like general reading. There's a mechanical section that I got a 26% on. There's like 8 or 9 sections, and I did really well on it. And an Army recruiter called my house every week the 4 years that I was at college. And my mom was like, she's not joining the Army. Stop calling.
Why didn't I take that?
I never took it either.
Yeah.
I don't think I took it.
Really?
I took it to get out of class. I mean, I was never going to join the Army.
I mean, I went to private school, so they probably didn't have to do it.
I didn't go to private school. I don't remember taking that.
It might have been offered, but I mean,
it stands for Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
I mean, if y'all were on the college prep track, which I know that you both were, you probably weren't advertised it. This is for the tech prep kids primarily. I mean, because, there's a huge social class divide for the kids that go straight to the Army enlisting instead of going to college in our society.
Yeah. Huh.
And so once you enlist in the Army, you get assigned, well, you're not get assigned, but you take this test that kind of places you intellectually to see what you're suited for. And, when military intelligence and linguists have to get really high in language, et cetera, and like the folks that work in the engine room have to do well on the mechanical reasoning part. And if you're just a regular infantry person, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's a lot lower than the more skilled trades, which makes sense because you're not, fixing the engine of a nuclear submarine. You're operating a rifle, which isn't to say that, the infantry is dumb people, but the skill level is different.
Type of intelligence. Like I could no more fix a nuclear reactor than I could, I don't know what else would do a math problem. I can't do math problem.
I can't remember if a sergeant is in charge of a corporal. Yeah, there you go. I'm fired before I even get a foot in the door.
But I could argue about the rule against perpetuities.
Yeah, but I think there is something to be said though for a rating class infantry, especially that there's a very high death rate. Like that's not great. That's hard, and so I think the men that are known as cannon fodder, like it's a point of bravery for some, but like it still sucks. So war, man.
What's it good for?
I have a less serious question. What are pineapple squash and strawberry squash?
Squash is just a fruit drink, I think. It's just
Oh, that's true.
Oh, I thought that on
It's like a daiquiri.
I didn't know that. I thought that on that planet, maybe they grew native squashes that tasted like pineapples and strawberries on Earth or something.
Yeah, squash is a drink you can get here now. I mean, it's just fruit.
Really?
Sugary fruit, just a sugary fruit drink, yeah.
Well, I'm disappointed.
I'm sorry.
I was
You
imagining
can also
like
milk a squash if you'd like.
I was imagining like a zucchini plant, but it's supposed to taste like a strawberry because you can't grow strawberries on Sanctuary or wherever they were.
Oh, yeah. So,
All right, withdrawn.
I don't know if y'all will know this reference, but in Logan's Run, there's Sanctuary for that. But it's a very different type of Sanctuary. So
I've never seen Logan's Run.
I haven't either.
Logan's Run is great. I was a Sandman for Dragon Con 2011, my very first Dragon Con costume.
I know.
So.
I was one of the green toga people with you.
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right. I forgot
never
about that. That was like back when I barely knew you. Yeah.
That was when we snuck in that year. We didn't have passes. Mm-hmm. We don't endorse doing that.
Yep.
We buy our passes now. We always buy our passes. But I didn't know what it was all about. So I wasn't going to buy like a bajillion dollar. It was my preview year. I had to figure out what it was about. And then I was like, oh, shit, I need to be here. And I bought a 3-year pass every year since. Or a 3-day pass.
It is a fun movie where it's a utopian society in the future where everything is great, but if you turn 30, you die. So that's how they make sure the resources last. And one day Logan is like, I'm a run. And he doesn't want to die.
Only
is that like Forrest Gump going for a run? Or?
Kinda. Yeah. He says, I don't want to die. Life's great. I'm just 30. Can you imagine? Ugh.
I mean that my 30s have been achy, but they've certainly been good. Way better than my 20s.
Yeah. So, all right.
How do they kill you?
Oh, so you go to this carnival type thing called Sanctuary where you float up and are disintegrated.
At 30?
Yeah, at 30.
Nothing's even started to ache yet.
I know. In the Logan's Run book, it's 20.
What?
Like, that just seems like a waste of time.
Honestly.
What do they think? What can you possibly accomplish by the time you're 20? Nothing. The answer is nothing.
I mean, half of college.
I would like to report. I've been thinking this whole time in my hindbrain about women in this book. And I would like to, and the idea of like subculture or subversive culture and that sort of thing. And I would like to report that per Wikipedia, Heinlein, for his time, was apparently extremely liberal, though he was a registered Republican. Isaac Asimov described Heinlein at the time as, quote, a flaming liberal. And he got married a couple times, but it seems like his favorite wife was the middle one, Ginny. And she was an engineer too. And they together, they sort of designed this really fancy engineering in their house. Like, he seems to like smart women, I guess is my point. She was a chemist and a rocket test engineer and had a higher rank in the Navy than Heinlein did. And like, so it's interesting knowing that and like seeing how he sort of describes the women in these books. It's like, he obviously has a lot of respect for women, but he also sees them as set decoration. I don't know. It's
ornamental on page 27.
Yeah. Like, it's so funny. He has this very interesting sort of dueling vision of women, which is born out. It's born out in his marriages. For
my misogynist moment, my preface is, he seems to think that women are only sex objects around for men's pleasure. Is that misogyny? Maybe it's the same thing. I don't know. So
I mean, he does and he doesn't, though. Like,
there's nothing good about women besides the fact that they can be pilots.
Well, they're the best pilots, right?
Yeah,
which is different.
But that's 2 sentences on like page 28. Like, the rest of the novel is just him saying how much that women are the reason why we're fighting, which is, I don't know,
very reductionist. Yeah.
Well, and like, it's just not true for every man. Maybe it's true for Johnny. So like, I also think that he doth protest a little too much sometimes. So at one point he sends a paragraph talking about how much he loves girls. He expostulates, then at the end packs it up nicely with a, I've always liked girls. In case for 1 second we've doubted his straightness. Like,
this always goes back to Brooklyn Nine-Nine for me, when Captain Holt is a gay man, but sometimes for like a sting operation, he plays a straight man. And in order to play a straight man, his go-to is to describe women's breasts. And usually it is as heavy. He describes them as heavy breasts. That's how he plays a straight man. And every time I read something like this, where the guy is like waxing poetic about women, like to a weird degree, and like insisting how straight he is, like that's what I always think about as Captain Holt and those heavy breasts.
That's why I don't buy his love of women, because he talks about them in theory. There's not one boob talk this entire book. Like, what kind of man is this?
Yeah, I mean, he talks about little Carmen and her little outfits and her not having hair and how she's still cute without her hair and stuff, but not one boob, not one
Yeah,
boob the whole
no,
time.
like, I
Maybe he's
mean-
just not a boob man, maybe he's not a
Well,
boob.
but like he doesn't talk anything sexual about these women. It's this weird like Lancelotian,
Yeah.
idyllic love, which is just weird for like an army man. I don't know.
Yeah, it's true.
So
I don't know. I think I feel like it's not fair to get mad at them when they talk about boobs and then judge them for not talking about boobs.
It's not so much judgment. It's just like, I just wonder what the motivating factor there was. I'm not necessarily saying he should talk about breasts so that we all know that I'm not sure what I'm saying, honestly. I just think it's interesting. Like his view of women in this book is very interesting. It's like very put them on a pedestal and, idealize them and, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which anybody who has actual experience with women knows that's not true.
So my problem with his love of women and the idyllic is that he doesn't qualify it. Like, I'm sure he's not talking about frumpy 50-year-old Navy secretaries on this spaceship. Like, any women really, Heinlein, or just like hot young ones like Carmen? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
I was annoyed in the early part of the book when he's talking about how women make the best pilots, but then he's also complaining about how when women are piloting the ship, it's a very rough ride because they can pilot faster and their reaction times are better and they themselves can handle more Gs. So they pilot differently from men and it's better, but it's not as comfortable.
Women can't drive.
I was annoyed by that. Like,
Yeah.
we're better at it, but you don't like how we're better at it.
Oh, maybe he secretly thinks women can't drive. And so he puts them in the pilot seat in this book because it's fiction, science fiction.
This world is crazy. Women are the better drivers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that I could find for a feminist favorite was the fact that truly none, except for the fact that Heinlein grants women the ability to be better pilots in space. So thank you, Heinlein. Yeah, and then boob top, like I said before, couldn't find any boobs or any
The movie more than makes up for the lack of boobs.
Yeah. It's just boobs.
I couldn't believe
Just
all the
one
boobs
big
in the
boob.
movie.
Yeah, but just casual shower boobs in the background, just boobs. I got kind of desensitized to boobs, even though I have some.
Something I like about that in the movie is I think when we're looking at that shower scene and everybody showers together and bunks together, I think we're like in a post-sexual assault society at that point. Because, the argument for segregated bathrooms and showers and all that is to protect the women, right? So,
Because men can't help themselves.
yeah, exactly. So, and in that scenario, like we actually see one of the women slap Johnny on the butt as he's leaving the shower. And I was just like, oh, this is interesting. Well, one thing I want to say about the movie is that it seems to primarily be a movie about Denise Richards smiling.
Yeah, in slow motion.
She does have a good smile.
Well,
Which is so funny, though.
It does happen so slowly. I feel like her teeth are like the sunrise.
Oh, I know that poem. No.
When Gandalf comes over the hill on the 5th day.
It's so funny, though, because I thought Dizzy was like the real catch in the situation for Johnny, and he's just going after dumb Denise Richards. Ugh.
I hate that in the movie that both of the characters that have Latinx names are played by white people. Like Carmen and Juan Rico,
Oh yeah,
our hero.
It's a complete whitewash. I mean, I read Juan as Filipino because he speaks Tagalog. That's his at-home language.
They say that in the book?
Yeah.
I completely missed that. Okay.
He mentions at the end of the book that they speak Tagalog at home, so I read him as
Oh my gosh, I
Filipino,
totally missed that.
and then we turn on the movie and it's like not even a Ken doll because Ken has brown hair. It's a blonde Ken doll. I was like, oh, and then they call Carmen. How do they say her name? Ibanez.
Ibanez.
Yeah, but in the movie they say Ibanez, most of them.
Yeah.
And it's Ibanez. I mean, it's even got a tilde over the N in the book and everything. I mean, these are like, you could be white people. I mean, I don't know what this world looks like. I don't know how ethnicities have shifted and blended. I don't know. But I've found it very inauthentic to the source material that everybody was a very clear white person.
Clear. I like that description.
So, because I couldn't find any woman boob talk, the most action you get in this novel is from dudes huddled together and nestled in each other's arms to stay warm in boot camp.
Sexy.
before we move, I was going to say that one thing I like about old science fiction books is to see what they got right and what they got wrong about the future. And I enjoy that in this particular future, they have not invented email. Everybody is still just writing letters to one another and sending them across space, and they have to catch up with you, like as if you were on a whaling boat. The letters have to catch up with you somewhere.
Amy, I had the same thought with regard to his math books. He's carrying his math books all around space with him.
They haven't invented any way of like keeping data in a smaller form than books.
Do y'all know that when you go to boot camp today, though, they take your phone for like 12 weeks or whatever?
Oh, that's like being on The Bachelor.
Yeah. They take your phone.
It's just like that.
I mean, there's probably just as many tiers.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, they have to, right? Otherwise, you'd just be completely distracted the whole time. Because we know how phones are.
Yep.
Got to scroll to the end of the internet every day.
So for fantastical food, you mentioned the squash drink, but that was about it. And I'm going to say that I was very disappointed because we get all these rituals about dining, but not a single meal. And
no MREs.
Yeah, I love institutional food. Tell me about the slop. Tell me how many apples you got. Tell me about the moist towelettes. How many calories you have to consume. I want to know all these things.
They had real showers, it sounded like, on these boats.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah. No moist towelettes for them.
Well, I mean, like at boot camp when they're like in actual tents, though, they would probably need moist towelettes.
That's true. That would be all moist towelettes.
But again, another Army story from Haley's past. My dad used to get bunches of MREs, and they're so much fun to go into. There's like little bits of peanut butter, and there's a little teeny tiny 1-inch tall Tabasco sauce.
It's like room service or plain food.
I got a 1-inch tall Tabasco sauce at a fancy hotel in Amelia Island.
I love tiny room service food. They're so wasteful, but they're so tiny and cute.
MREs are fun. So I would have loved to seen what like space MREs would be like.
I learned I recently drove 5 hours, and on my drive I was listening to a podcast about the rescue of those the Thai kids that got caught in that cave, and I learned that they brought them MREs to give them food when they found them.
They come with their own heaters. So, yeah.
So you can warm your food up?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's amazing.
All right.
See,
I have a dad's
a lot
story.
of ingenuity. There's a lot of ingenuity in the military for like efficiency.
Haley, when you were talking about is it ASVAB? Is that the test?
ASVAB.
ASVAB. When you were talking about that, I remembered something that my dad used to say. So my dad, he says, okay, nobody knows my dad. You guys don't even know my dad. My husband doesn't know my dad. So I need to provide a little bit of context. Most of the things that he says are probably not true.
Yeah.
But this story strikes me as a big cell phone. So my dad said that he wanted to be in the Air Force and he couldn't be because he's desperately nearsighted. So am I. Thank you. No, thank you. But he said that he took some tests and that his reaction time was in the top 1th percentile. Now, 1th isn't a word, but also, may I remind everybody that if you're actually in the top 1%, then you're considered in the 99th percentile.
Yeah.
So if you're in the 1st percentile, doesn't that mean that you were at the very bottom of the slowness barrel?
Yep.
Well, my dad's story.
So the ASVAB is a written test that I took in 2 hours. Like there was no like
they didn't throw a ball at your head and you had to catch it.
Well, and also because the Air Force, I mean, he just couldn't have been a pilot. He could have done like any other job in the Air Force.
Yeah, he could have been like a mechanic or something. Yeah,
he may not have wanted to go into the.
Was the whole story a lie?
Maybe.
It's hard to say, Lori. It's hard to say.
Do y'all know about stolen valor?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So, please tell us all about stolen valor.
People on the internet love to lie about being in the Army. Like, oh, I was a Navy SEAL in like 93 and went here and here. And then they post about it because like they think it gets some chicks or, you know, valor or whatever.
Or
and
like
then
discounts at the movies.
Yeah. And so, but
there's for discounts.
But then there's other people that track these motherfuckers down and like expose them like online. It's fascinating. Like, it's fascinating. So
Stolen Valor sounds like a really good title for a movie starring Harrison Ford, in which he does something literal to steal a ship called Valor or something like that.
It probably is
my
a
contribution
movie.
to that.
Yeah, it is interesting stuff because, with social media, there's all kinds of people that do all kinds of weird stuff. And there's like a lot of veterans will track these people down and expose them and be like, stop.
What happens to them? They just get doxxed or
it's not a crime necessarily just to like lie about your past, but it's taken very seriously for people that, Navy SEALs especially that, die for their country. So
I get it. I could see that.
There's the Stolen Valor Act of 2013. I was trying to Google it, and my predictive text kept saying stolen vape, stolen vapor.
Stolen vapor. Also a serious offense. No.
Ooh, you can report it. 2013 Act makes it a crime if you do it with intent to obtain money, property, or something.
Like if you're just doing it to
get
cruise.
like get retirement money or something.
That would be a little bit harder, but like there's situations where it could be kind of dicey, I imagine. But yeah, it's a big thing.
There's a video called Top 10 Stolen Valor Moments on YouTube.
Yeah, that's probably what
confrontation porn.
Yep.
Confrontation porn, that's a fun phrase.
I would never watch that. So soap stuff. We touched this briefly. I gotta say that my dad is now my direct subordinate in the Space Marines and my mom got killed by bugs is pretty soapy.
Yes.
You are absolutely right.
That whole interaction with his dad when he's like exiting the boat to go to officer school and his dad's getting on the boat because he just wants to track down and be with his son is like some top soap.
Well, and I thought it was really weird until I realized that the dad is only 22 years older than Johnny. So I was like, that's like me. That's like my age and my son. Like it's like he's 40 years old. He's probably fine. But it'd be different if he was like a 60-year-old dad. So.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
In the 50s, they made people older, though. Like 50 in 1950 is different than 50 today.
It's true.
I was nervous during that scene because even all the way toward almost the end of this book, I still had the hope upon hope that there might be like, I don't know, a plot or an event. And so I was like, oh, shit, because his dad had all these misgivings. His dad was like, no, I have to be there. I have to be there. And Johnny's like, no, hang out with me. It's only an hour. And I was thinking like an hour is a long fucking time to be late for something in this world.
Yeah.
And so I thought something bad was going to happen. I thought his dad was going to get a court martial and he'd have to see his dad get flogged or something. And then it was just like, no, he just showed up and he was late. And the guy in the desk was like, well, I'd have been disappointed if you hadn't been late, soldier. That's your dad. And I was like, oh, still nothing. Still
it's like when Luke Skywalker was late to his sister's wedding. Yep. All right. Did y'all like the book?
Yes.
I don't think it's a bad book, but it's not my cup of tea.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes
that.
Yes. I liked it. I read it first in 1998, and like I said earlier, I literally watched YouTube documentaries about boot camp, so I enjoyed it. But reading it again, I was like, man, this is I could have used a little more plot. That's about it. So.
I could have sworn that I read this book before, but the whole time I was reading it, I was like, nothing in this sounds familiar. So now I don't know what I read that I thought was Starship Troopers. Maybe it was Ender's Game.
I would not have finished it if not for the podcast. I read fully the second half of it yesterday.
Yeah.
I will be finishing the last 10 pages after we finish this podcast.
When I was in middle school, I read a lot of Tom Clancy and Stephen Koontz books, and I would go into 8th grade, and my friend Lynn would be like, oh, my dad's reading that book right now. And that's so y'all won't. I didn't get invited to alcohol parties in high school, and that's one reason why.
But did you find the Red October, Haley?
Oh my God, I love Tom Clancy so much. Okay,
I don't think I've ever read a Tom Clancy book. I
haven't told y'all my biggest, the weirdest thing. So y'all know about the Star Wars novella I wrote when I was in 6th grade.
Oh yeah, I still want to have a live an unboxing on a podcast of that.
So that was just for. That one you're talking about is just for a paper I wrote for school. I wrote like a 70-page book that is lost to the sands of time because it was on an old compact computer.
Yes.
But I also got really into Vietnam era books about pilots, and I wrote fanfic based. I was writing Vietnam era American pilot fanfic. That's
love
ridiculous.
You so much. I love you so much, and I want to read all of that fan fiction.
It doesn't exist.
I really wish you read your book.
I know that's a tragedy of our time. I was only writing fan fiction of like Sweet Valley High type things. But later when I was into reading more complicated things, I never wrote any fan fiction about them. And now I regret that. Maybe I'll write it now.
I wrote a lot of little stories in elementary school, and the protagonist was always my dog, Moon Pie. And I just remembered one of them. It was Moon Pie in space.
Oh, Moon Pie went to space.
Yeah, she was a Starship Trooper.
Oh, I love that. Moon Pie, good job.
I wouldn't even say that I wrote a lot of fan fiction. I wrote 2 60-page novellas and then called it a day. That's all I ever wrote for fan
That's
fiction.
more than many.
That's true.
That's more than I ever
more
wrote.
than most.
Moon Pie in space was like 10 pages with a sentence per page. And all my teachers said I was going to be a writer when I grew up, and I didn't. I haven't even written one fanfic.
It came true for me, guys.
There's still time, Lori. There is still time. We could still be writers.
It's true.
I mean, technically, y'all write all day long.
I mean, my friend Liz Lawson published her first book when she was 40. And she has a lot of social media content insisting to people that just because they're 40 doesn't mean they can't try new things.
Well, I told Kevin that I am so tired of reading books about very special teenagers. And I read The Poppy War recently by R.F. Kuang, and I did love it, but I bought it without knowing anything about it. And so when I started reading it and I realized it was about a special teenager going to a school for special teenagers, I was like, oh, no, not again. And again, let me stress that I did really love that book. I think it's very good. I highly recommend it. But I was just sort of like, another book about a special teenager. And I turned to Kevin and I was like, I just want to read a book about a middle-aged lady living her life, and maybe she's special. Maybe she's a special middle-aged lady, or maybe she's just a regular one living her life. And Kevin goes, well, maybe you should write that book. And I said, yeah,
you should.
Maybe I will. So watch out, everybody. I'm going to write
absolutely
ordinary story about an ordinary woman with the ordinary face and ordinary breasts that you probably won't even hear mentioned.
You just assume.
I'll buy it and be like, wow, nothing's happening. Because that's life, y'all.
I would love that book.
Well, but that's why people read romance, because they're like, this is a person like me, but there's also hot guys.
My friend Liz's book is about teenagers, but, it's a good book. I'm going to plug it. Y'all should read The Lucky Ones by my friend Liz Lawson.
I've been reading a little bit of romance ever since I watched Bridgerton.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
And I read the first Bridgerton book. I did not finish it. I DNF'd that book with only 30 pages left. I did not think that the book was nearly as good as the show, and missed a lot of the funny parts. Sometimes. Well, the Queen isn't in it, and the Queen is so funny.
Yes.
And Simon, Simon in the show, he's got a lot of problems. He needs to go to therapy, but he's basically a decent person. But in the book, he's a very shitty to Daphne all the time. And I was just like,
oh, no.
I can't, I didn't like it. But I heard an episode of the Babysitter's Club podcast where they talked about a romance novel called The Governess Game. And it sounded good. So I listened to it on Audible, and it was really good. It was actually very funny. It was a fun book. And I thought it was cute, so I listened to another one of her books by Tessa Dare, and they're actually really good. They have a lot of witty repartee.
I think probably romance novels get a bad rap because they're mostly written by and read by women, but there's a lot of it's just like any genre. There's going to be good ones, there's going to be bad ones. I think you can definitely find, worthwhile.
Yeah, people really
novels.
do poop on romance novels. The woman who owns our local used bookstore, Bookish, support your local bookstores, everybody. She told me that she's had people come in and basically find out is this a safe space to shop for romance, because there are sometimes she said that they'll go to other highbrow independent booksellers around Atlanta, and people are not nice to them when they're looking for romance. That's not nice. So be nice.
I don't like that story at all.
Let people enjoy their books. Middle-aged lady genre, it's coming.
I'm here for it. All right.
Here for it too.
Star Wars or Lord of the Rings? I have 2 points. One, obviously this is Star Wars because they're spaceships, but there's a lot of mud and a lot of bugs that look like orcs in my head. So 1 point for Lord of the Rings. So I don't know.
Fair point.
Gosh.
Fair point.
I'm gonna say Star Wars because basically Johnny is learning to use the Force.
Is he?
Which is how to control, I don't know. He goes on this little journey to learn how to use the Force, and then he goes to fight with it, right? He goes to military camp, learns how to be a military person, goes and fights.
There's a lot of fellowship, though.
Maybe he's also like Frodo, because he's
that's true.
taken on this task that is much too big for him.
But Frodo does not learn how to fight, and Luke does.
Luke doesn't learn anything, really.
Huh?
I mean, he learns the Force, but he doesn't learn anything about, like, military strategy.
But he learns how to wield a lightsaber.
I mean, I guess.
I mean, Frodo is
He does.
present during numerous battles.
That's true. He is present.
He has a sword.
He has to be saved by Aragorn a lot.
I like that so in a lot of science fiction, there's the Ansible, which is Ursula Le Guin's device for instantaneous communication, and a lot of books started using this. And I feel like Heinlein started something, or he tried to, with the Cherenkov drive, which is their faster-than-light transport device.
Yeah, he sure did try.
But no one else used it.
Well, other people
maybe they
use
did.
the idea, but they don't call it. Like in the Expanse series, they have the Epstein drive.
Yeah,
which
maybe.
is,
I mean, to be fair, I've not researched it. Maybe somebody else has used
Or
it.
just
But I just
warp
yeah.
speed.
Yeah.
I
FTL.
mean, it's literally a war in the stars, so I gotta go Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I just had to. I had to use my legal education for something.
it's weirdly neither, huh? But I think I'm going to come down on Star Wars too, since it's in the stars.
I mean, it's definitely Star Wars.
But it's like not though, isn't it? I guess the bugs are kind of stormtroopers.
I mean, the spaceships are. That's like 90% of Star Wars.
I guess that's true. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while now.
So,
I will say that I'm still plugging for us to read the Forever War. Now I want to read the Forever War more because apparently it was a reaction to this book.
yes.
Yeah.
It is very similar and very bleak, but we can read it.
What are we reading next?
We had 2 different listeners request it, so we should do it.
Are we reading A Memory Called Empire next?
We're reading A Memory Called Empire next.
That won the Hugo in 2020.
Yes.
So that'll be fun.
People say that's so good. I'm excited about it.
I am also excited. I hope it has a plot. That'll be exciting.
I bet it does. I'm betting it's got a plot.
Alrighty. I think that wraps it all up for us.
All right. Good times, everyone.
Okay. We'll see ya next time. Bye.
Bye.